The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
And what is going on, SEC Talk fans? We are back. Week 2 is in the books, and we're going to be looking ahead to Week 3, and we're getting into some of the conference play. I think that we're both excited for it. The cupcake games are fine and all, but we are getting into the meat and potatoes of the SEC slate. But what a Week 2 it was. We had some upsets in the conference, including Alabama going down to Texas, and then Texas A&M falling to Miami. So those are the two headlines, and we'll get into our main question. Is the SEC West up for grabs this year? Tune in as we go on. So back with me again is my co-host Wade. How was your weekend? I know that you went to the LSU Grambling game. How was that?
Yeah, it was great to be back in Tiger Stadium for the first time this season. They had a flyover, which was always exciting. And I thought LSU, came back from the Florida State loss pretty well at home. And, I think it kind of got the fans back into it and excited for the season, seeing how wide open the SEC really is.
Yeah, I'm sure that you're not alone. I'm sure that everybody who is watching this, who's been to some of the recent games, it just feels different and feels good to be back in your favorite team's stadium. So let's get right into Week 3 action here on the SEC Talk. As always on the show, we go through our SEC teams and the AP Top 25 poll. The AP Top 25 poll is usually released on Sunday, and since we were doing the show on Sunday, we're getting a quick sneak peek of the recent AP Top 25 poll. Not really many changes outside of the conference. Florida State moved up. They're now the number 3 team in the land. And number 4 is now the Texas Longhorns. So we will see if this is finally the year that Texas is back, or they can get to the college football playoff. But on the SEC side, number 1 is Georgia. Even after a little bit of struggles with Ball State, Georgia was able to win that game 45-3. So the Dogs stay on top. Number 1, they face off against South Carolina this weekend. So that's going to be their first test of few throughout their schedule. And then we see number 10, Alabama. Alabama moved down 3 all the way down to number 10. I think that's about right. I thought that the AP poll would either put them at number 9 or number 10. And then number 11, Tennessee. They put Alabama ahead of Tennessee because Tennessee struggled mightily against Austin Peay. If you really looked at that, it was 6-3 in the second half and almost going into the half. So Tennessee's offense struggled. It was a weather delay, a lot of weather delays throughout the nation this weekend. But number 11 was Tennessee. They just dropped 2 spots after the recent struggles. But we'll see if Tennessee is going to be for real this weekend when they travel to Gainesville to face off against Florida. LSU stays the same after a blowout victory against Grambling. And I think that Ole Miss was the team to talk about in the SEC after a huge win in New Orleans against Tulane. They find themselves moving up 3 spots, but moving out of the poll is Texas A&M. So we go from 6 all the way now down to 5. So the SEC slowly dwindling down some teams. Hopefully that is the last time that we see that, and hopefully we get some more SEC teams on the horizon. So let's go on now to our next one. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, pertaining SEC football, on the Week 2 slate, on the Week 3 slate, or just, what's going through your mind, just leave it in the comment section down below, and we will get to your questions throughout all of our segments throughout this show. All right, let's get into everybody's favorite fan segment. That is SEC Fantasy. Now, fantasy football, I know, is going on. There's some NFL games that are going on. So good luck to you also in your fantasy football season on that side. But on SEC Fantasy is always presented by our friends over at Mahler Bros Golf. If you want to upgrade your golf attire, Mahler Bros Golf is for you. Get 15% off your purchase at Mahler Bros Golf apparel and gear. You can use code BELLYUP, that's all uppercase, 15% off at mahlerbros.com. Once again, that's all uppercase belly up for 15% off of your purchase. All right, before we get into the results, let's get into the rules here. It's pretty similar to what we are used to here on the show. Maybe if we get to the mid-season point, we'll switch it up, get a little spicy here in the second half of the season. But for now, we're going to do one quarterback, one running back, a receiver, a defense, and then as always, cannot use a player you picked from last week. So unlike last week, we're actually going to get to results first. I screwed that up on last week's
Hey, we
show, but this
improvised,
week,
man.
yes, we always have to improvise on the show. So let's get into the week 2 results. Wade, let's kick it off with you. You won in week number 1. We'll see if you win and take the crown once again in week number 2. So take us through your team.
All right. So at quarterback, I had Will Rogers, the quarterback for Mississippi State. As most of y'all are familiar with, the Mississippi State offense, they were just a gun and shoot type offense, slinging it left and right. Will Rogers would throw the ball upwards of 40 times. So he was a SEC fantasy mainstay for us for the last 2 seasons. That might be not the case anymore. Mississippi State seems to be more committed to running the football. Jaquavius Marks had, I think, 25 carries. So I think Mississippi State and Will Rogers will be a good play in SEC fantasy, depending on the matchup. But I don't think you can just assume that he's going to throw for 300 plus yards. So that was the case this weekend as he went through just for 162 yards against Arizona. That game went to overtime, so he even had a chance to rack up a few additional yards and just couldn't get it done for me. Jalen Wright at running back, he had a really good game, went for 118 yards on the ground. Seems to be Tennessee's bell cow back, but we'll see if it's for real against a little bit tougher of an opponent this week against Florida. And then Trey Harris, he followed up his 4-touchdown performance in the opener with a respectable 55 yards against Tulane. Tulane's defense really was tough at first on the Ole Miss attack and really more so on the ground. But then Trey Harris and company started to stretch the field through the air. He ended up with 55 yards. And then the Kentucky defense, they let up 311 yards. I would have liked to see them hold Eastern Kentucky to under 250 yards or so, but 311 is respectable. And ultimately that brings my total score to 24 yards. I think that we'll see that the quarterback position played a big part in the total score this week.
Yeah, quarterback and defense was definitely the difference. We'll see if that 24 number holds up and gives you your second consecutive win. And as you can see, it will not. You're going to fall a little bit short here in week number 2 as we now go on to my team. And like you mentioned, the quarterbacks was the difference. Your quarterback only threw for 13 completions, which I never would have thought that Will Rogers was going to get that low. But it's against Arizona. Yeah, it was just so disappointing. The offense coordinator is definitely not calling the right plays up. But Jackson Dart, quarterback out of Ole Miss, a very good outing. Against Tulane, 267 yards. We see Cody Schrader, the running back of Missouri, getting 84 yards. That's definitely solid. He feels like one of the most consistent fantasy SEC running backs that we've seen. And then we got Dane Key, the wide receiver for Kentucky. Not the game that I was hoping for, but still 42 yards. It's still very good. And then Georgia defense. I know this was a little bit of a cop-out, just go with the best defense in the SEC, but after last week, I just feel like I need to get into the win column. So I just went with easy pick, Georgia defense, 224 yards to get me to 169. So the score is even 1-1. So we will see how the rest of the season goes and who ends up winning it. We always do the bowl season and we double that. So we're definitely going to be excited to do that again. So since now let's go on to the draft. I did have the first pick. I didn't go with the quarterback position. I ended up going with the defense. You'll see what my thinking was for the first pick. But you're going to go with Texas A&M's Connor Weigman going up against, I think that opponent, Texas A&M coming off of loss, I think that they're going to be motivated. So I think that Weigman is a good pick here.
Yeah, that was exactly my thought process behind it. A&M had no problem moving the ball through the air as they were trying to come back from behind against Miami. I think they'll be more so out in front against UL Monroe, but I think that Weigman will get it done early and often. I think that he really is their offense. They don't have a Devin A-Chain this year to rely on, so he's really got to sling it for the Aggies.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the SEC West quarterback, go with KJ Jefferson. Arkansas only scored 28 points against Kent State, so I feel like this offense really needs to find their rhythm before SEC play starts. They have to travel to Death Valley to face LSU here in the coming weeks. But they got BYU. BYU's secondary, has been a little bit inconsistent for me throughout the first couple of weeks of the season. So I think that KJ Jefferson, the offense goes back to game one against Western Carolina. They were able to find their rhythm. So I'm going to go with KJ Jefferson. People are listing him to be one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, has a lot of experience. So I think he uses his experience this weekend against BYU. So two SEC West quarterbacks go off of the board there. So now let's go on to the running back position, and we're going to go with some more experience here. You're going to go, yes, this is the same Ray Davis from Vanderbilt, and now he's at Kentucky. So this is definitely not a new sight for us. So you have a lot of confidence in Ray Davis. I think he's done wonders for you in the past. So he's now wearing Big Blue Nation. So you're going to go with Ray Davis.
Yes, he hopped up upon the Big Blue bandwagon, as we like to call it here. Look at him. He's got a little swag. I'm proud of him. He dropped the Vanderbilt colors. Now he's got the blue number 1 on. Looking good there for Kentucky. So far this season, he's had 2 really good games. He actually was more of a dual threat this past week. He had both touchdowns on the ground and in the air, adding about 40 yards each way. So I only get credit for the rushing yards on this show, but I do think that he'll be a big part of what they do. In their last tune-up game, they play Akron, and then they'll jump into SEC play.
Yeah, Davis, if you watch in the first couple of weeks, I mean, Devin Leary, everyone wants to talk about him, but Ray Davis has been the majority of that Kentucky offense. It just feels like the next step. We saw it's like Benny Snell, Chris Rodriguez. Ray Davis just feels like the next great Kentucky running back, even though that he spent majority of his collegiate career already at Vanderbilt. I'm going to go with Montrell Johnson. This is our first Florida Gator here that we see on this season. They're facing against Tennessee. I feel like if Florida's going to really keep close in this game or pull off the upset, it's got to be one of these running backs. I either thought about going with ETN, but it feels like the first couple of weeks, Montrell Johnson has been their guy. So I feel comfortable. It's in Gainesville. I think that Florida behind their home crowd is going to fare well against the Tennessee defense. It's been a hit or miss. In the Virginia game, they were very good. In the Austin Peay game, their offense wasn't that good, and their defense really held up. So I think that if Florida ultimately wants to win this game, Johnson has to be a factor. So I'm just going to roll with Montrell Johnson against the Volunteers. All right, let's go on now to the pass catchers. So we had a little bit of 2 SEC West, 2 SEC East there. We'll see what division we go to here. And we have an SEC West, SEC East. Brian Thomas is a new face. We saw Malik Neighbors got picked up last couple of years. And then the face of the Georgia Bulldogs, Brock Bowers, he is back for yet another SEC fantasy season. But Brian Thomas coming off of a huge game against Grambling. You're thinking the same against Mississippi State.
Yeah, I know that Malik Neighbors is probably the best wide receiver on this LSU team. But so far, through the first 2 weeks, Brian Thomas has been Jaden Daniels' go-to guy, honestly. I mean, he's got, I think, 4 touchdowns now, picking up a few against Grambling. And people forget in the Florida State game, I mean, he had over 100 yards receiving. He's kind of been that deep ball threat, whereas I kind of thought he was going to be more of the red zone, jump ball, go get it kind of guy. So it's good to see Brian expanding on his game and being a reliable target for the Tigers.
Yeah, he's definitely one of those forgotten names and the media doesn't want to talk about, but Brian Thomas has all the tools. I think that he's a really good wide receiver in the college level. I think that's going to transfer over to the NFL level, but we know about Brock Bowers and what he's going to do. I just have flashbacks of last year's game against South Carolina, and he torched up that secondary, and South Carolina's secondary has just been getting eaten up, against Furman. Furman scored over 20 points in North Carolina, and Drake May and that offense had their way. So I think that Brock Bowers, Georgia has been kind of like walking in the park, but I think that this week you're going to see that just Georgia offense is for real against South Carolina. So I'm going to put all my chips in the basket. I know it's a, quote unquote receiver here, but Brock Bowers is a tight end, but you know what? I think that he's going to put up wide receiver 1 numbers against the Gamecocks this weekend. All right, let's go to the most important of these position groups, and that is the defense. And I think that both of us, especially, have learned our lessons to just pick the defenses that are going up against cupcakes. You try to do that Kentucky against Eastern Kentucky. That didn't work. But
Doesn't
this
always
week,
work.
you're going to go with Auburn versus Samford. Auburn coming off of a huge win on the road against Cal.
Yeah, I thought Auburn looked impressive on the road defensively against Cal. They held the Golden Bears to just 10 points. So I think that momentum will continue here at home against the FCS opponent. And then pretty much from this week on, almost until the final week of the season, we'll have, nothing but SEC on SEC matchups. So it'll get very interesting on our defensive selections. But for the time being, I'll get Auburn some time in the spotlight, and then we'll see if they're legit whenever they have to start playing the big dogs.
Yeah, it's the first time we see the Auburn defense get taken. Texas A&M, I'm taking them, even giving up 48 points. I know they're just coming off probably one of their worst performances of the year, but I think that this defensive group is going to be determined coming back home, facing Louisiana Monroe. Louisiana Monroe's offense I haven't really been impressed with. I know that they're 2-0, but I think that Texas A&M, they use some, this motivation. They're going to go in the film room, see what they did wrong. They're going to use that and bring that on the field. So I think that Texas A&M, the Aggies defense, will be able to respond against the Warhawks this weekend. So, all right, that's our SEC fantasy teams for week 3. Obviously, next week we'll do the results and then do the same thing over and over again, but it's definitely fun to do each week. All right, let's get into some games and recap. It was a busy week 2 slate. Hopefully we get into some more games to talk about than last week. I feel like it was just on and on and on about, cupcakes after cupcakes. But the SEC week 2 recap, presented by SeatGeek. College football season is here. If you want to go watch your favorite college football teams, go to an event, use code BellyUpSports. Once again, that's all uppercase to receive $20 off your first purchase. So, all right, let's go on and waste no time here to get into the action here. And like I mentioned, the weather and Mother Nature hit early and often this season. I saw a graphic on ESPN. It was like 25 hours worth weather delays this weekend, and Vanderbilt and Wake Forest early in the morning at 10 a.m. and they didn't finish till about 5 p.m. in the afternoon. So
sounds like a day on the golf course.
Yeah, it's a long day on the golf course for both of these teams. But Vanderbilt got off to a rough start, literally on the first drive. One of the first plays, A.J. Swan threw an interception, and that set up Wake Forest's defense in the red zone, and Vanderbilt's defense was able to stop them for a 3-and-out, and Wake Forest got out to a 3-0 start, and that's when the weather delay happened. So after that, though, Wake Forest's offense was able to settle in. All of us had Wake Forest winning in this one. We were all correct in this one. But Vanderbilt, I just feel like I was saying like in the preseason, I was very impressed with how they finished the season. They beat Florida. They, I know that they lost to Tennessee, but, they got to 5 wins last year. I was thinking, okay, they have experience on both sides of the ball. I think that they can get to 6 wins. But so far, I'm not very impressed with this Vanderbilt team so far. Are you really on the same page as me, especially against Wake Forest, a team that lost Sam Hartman? I know that's going to be the story for Wake Forest, but Vanderbilt's defense just looks not right in their offense, with A.J. Swan. Maybe you have to go to somebody else. But what are your early thoughts on the season so far for the Doors?
Yeah, I think it's been a setback for Vanderbilt. Considering momentum they did seem to have at the end of last season. So I don't know if it's necessary that they need to make a quarterback change or not. I think it's probably more of a scheme thing. I would imagine that a school like Vanderbilt that struggles to recruit at an elite level doesn't have the next Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow sitting on the bench. So probably putting their best foot forward, and they just need to think about how they can scheme up a way to score more than 20 points. I think that they kind of skirted by against Hawaii and then had a tune-up game that they even struggled in. And then here against, Wake Forest for the second straight year, not a very competitive football game.
Yeah, so we will see if Vanderbilt can bounce back. They got a road test coming up this week against UNLV. So we will see if Vanderbilt's defense can figure out a way to get better each and every week. And the offense, can they find their identity? They have to do it quickly before SEC play begins to start up. All right, let's go on to the next game here in our week 2 slate. It features one of another SEC games that we have on this schedule. We have Ball State at number 1 Georgia. We'll talk about this a little bit just because of the struggles of Georgia. It feels like back-to-back weeks they've got off to the slow start. I know it's a different system. Todd Monken is now the Ravens offense coordinator, so you have a new scheme. You have a new quarterback with Carson Beck. But there's really no concern for me yet of this defense. I think that the defense definitely has talent. Now they haven't been tested. We'll see them against Spencer Rattler and the South Carolina offense moving forward. So do you have any question marks of this offense so far through the first 2 weeks of the season?
I mean, there's definitely questions to be asked, and I think we'll get a better picture of it once they start playing SEC teams such as South Carolina this week. But I mean, I don't have any reason for concern that it's going to hold up their championship run. I think that Georgia's still better defensively than they are offensively, but I think we expected that. So far so good. They took the traditional approach of playing 2 tune-up games, and then now they jump into conference play.
All right, let's get into the next SEC East team that was in action. That was the Kentucky Wildcats. They faced off against Eastern Kentucky. Wade got into this a little bit whenever he was talking about Kentucky's defense. Kentucky's defense did struggle in this one, but the offense, in week 1, we saw them off to a slow start, but they got to 44 points against Ball State. But in this one, it was just, I don't know about this Kentucky offense. With Devin Leary coming in, with Will Levis going out into the NFL, I thought it wasn't really going to be much of a downgrade, but Devin Leary just hasn't been able to find his connection. Dane Key is one of the best receivers in the SEC. I just don't think that the chemistry has built up yet. Ray Davis is definitely one of the bright stars there. So I think this is some same concerns here that we're going to talk about with everybody is this Kentucky offense. Do you have, the concerns that you a little bit have for Georgia on Kentucky's offense?
Yeah, I mean, pretty ugly game here on paper for Kentucky. I think that Devin Leary will eventually kind of come together for Kentucky, and we mentioned Ray Davis as well. So I think they'll have a nice balanced approach, and I think it'll start to click for them. I'm not sure if this game was impacted by the weather. It might have been on the outer bands of that storm. I definitely wasn't sitting down to watch Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky over the weekend. But yeah, I think that Kentucky's still trying to figure it out. They got one more tune-up game against Akron this week, and then again, we'll see once they play some real competition. But I have to think that with all the talent and experience on the field, that this team will come together.
All right, and our next game features a top 25 matchup in the Big Easy. This was definitely one of our games to watch this week, and I think that whoever was going to win this game was definitely going to be set up to have a really good season. So Ole Miss ended up winning this game 37-20. The big story in this one, that quarterback of Tulane, Michael Pratt, was unavailable in this one. I think that really hurt Tulane's chances. But even with that, I think that Tulane played really well. I think that their defense held up. Ole Miss's defense, I think that was the story of this one. They're able to force timely turnovers to really put this one away late. Tulane, this was a 4-quarter battle. Then late, Tulane's offense wasn't able to convert on a couple of 4th-down conversions. Ole Miss's offense decided to turn it up a notch. Quinshon Judkins, I picked him a little bit too late. He had a really good game, had a touchdown, had over 40 yards rushing, and then Jackson Dart had a really solid game too. So I think that, Ole Miss is one of those teams I think that we're going to be looking at here in the SEC West, that I think that their offense is good to win this SEC West. I think that their defense will definitely be the challenge here. So are you very impressed with Ole Miss going on the road here and being a good Tulane team?
Yeah, I think this is a solid win for Ole Miss. It would have been interesting to see if Michael Pratt did play, how this game could have been different. But I thought it was a really good game. At the time that I quit watching to go to the LSU game, I think it was tied at 17, maybe right around halftime. So Ole Miss definitely came out in the second half and just really took over this game. And the Ole Miss defense looks pretty good too. I mean, Tulane's no slouch on offense. So I know they had the backup quarterback in, but Ole Miss did a good job of making some adjustments and really dominated the second half. So I agree. I think out of everybody we've seen in the SEC West, I mean, there's no reason to think that Ole Miss is any different than Alabama or LSU at this point. They've got a pretty good offense, and honestly, defensively, they look more impressive than either team.
Yeah, so we will see if Ole Miss is in the thick of the SEC race whenever we hit the months of October and November. But now that their next challenge will be Georgia Tech at home. So next we go on to another top 25 team in action in the SEC. It was Texas A&M going on the road to Miami. Now the panel here had two Miami picks. Wade and I picked Miami. Went with the U, and Chet decided to go with the Aggies in Miami. 48 points against Texas A&M. I don't think that any of us had that. I thought that it was going to be a low-scoring game, two good defenses here, but 48-33, if you took the over, good for you because it hit with ease because the over was like 48, I believe, by the time the books closed for this game. But I thought that, Texas A&M, they had a hot start in this one. It was 17-7, and then all of a sudden, Tyler Van Dyke in Miami just woke up, and that offense just took off, and Texas A&M just couldn't stop them. Miami had that 98-yard kickoff return that just set that offense off. So what I talked about last week about being a 17-9 game and a sloppy game last year was the complete 360 spin, 48-33 Miami. I think that, everyone's going to be talking about Florida State, what they're doing. But if Miami can keep this up, look out for the Hurricanes to really steal Clemson's spot in the ACC championship. Maybe leaving along with North Carolina. But on Texas A&M side, another week 2 loss. They're 1-1. Should we once again be on panic mode for Texas A&M going to it yet another season where we've seen, I know that they weren't like a top 10 preseason rank, but every year we keep talking about Texas A&M being hyped. Is this going to be the year? Is this going to be the year? But I just don't know about this team anymore.
Yeah, I think they're right. Kind of where we thought they would be, right outside the top 25. I think they can recover from this game. It certainly isn't a season ender. Like LSU, you can lose a game like this on the road and still do very well in the conference, but they definitely need to make some adjustments. And I thought that Texas A&M's defense would kind of be their strong point this year, especially on that defensive line. So, it's hard to tell. I mean, if Miami and Tyler Van Dyke are the offense that we were promised to see last year that just didn't ever formulate, I think this is an okay loss. And Miami is explosive on offense. But if this is just a fluke game for Miami and it's because of a lack of talent for Texas A&M, it's going to be another long season for the Aggies.
Yeah, make a good point. So we'll definitely keep up if Miami is a team that we thought they were going to be last year winning the Coastal. But Miami is 2-0. Texas A&M is 1-1. We'll see if A&M can bounce back at home when they take on ULM. I'm sure that they will. I think that their offense is there with Bobby Petrino, but their defense, they have to get it rolling if they want to once again contend for the SEC West. And like you mentioned, they're still, in the SEC West games yet to be played for them. So if you're going to lose out of conference game isn't too bad, especially if you want to take the division this year. All right, let's go on now to another SEC West team that was in action. That was the Arkansas Razorbacks. And this was one of the teams that I was really wanting to get off to another fast start, and they just didn't. Arkansas only putting up 28 points against Kent State. Kent State got ran over in week number 1. So I think, Arkansas's offense, I don't know if they're just not showing all their cards yet or if this offense and KJ Jefferson isn't quite rolling. We know that they have one of the best running backs in Raheem Rocket Sanders, but maybe there's a little bit of misconnection between KJ Jefferson and the Arkansas against a team like Kent State. We definitely expect more for this team, but we're just going to breeze through this one real quick. It was just Arkansas taking care of their business, but we do have a little bit of concern of this Arkansas offense. I feel like some of these SEC teams are starting off way too slow for us, and that is going to start be alarming once SEC play gets rolling. But we'll go on to the next one featuring an FCS versus an SEC team. And like I mentioned, this was like a struggle Saturday for some of them. I know that they got off to
teams did pretty well.
Yeah, well, they did. But Tennessee did get the win 30-13. Like I mentioned, it was a very sloppy game at the start. I don't know if it was the weather affecting this game, but the rain They did. Jalen, you got to give credit to him. He had a really solid game, over 118 yards. But Tennessee's offense, another slow start. Some of these teams just got to start playing. I know it's only week 2, but you really got to start ramping it up, especially because Tennessee's got a road date with Florida coming up. But Tennessee remains 2-0, but the AP poll, like some of us, have also seen the slow starts affect their ranking too. So let's go on to the next game, and this was SEC Talks game of the week. This is going to be a future SEC matchup. And Texas, they're ready, I guess, for the SEC because they were not afraid of going in Bryant-Denny Stadium as they knock down Alabama 34-24. All of us picked Alabama, so we were definitely shocked of seeing this final score pop up on our feeds. But Jalen Milroe in this offense, I think that Jalen Milroe, I know that he had 2 interceptions in this game, but you saw the potential. He had that one deep pass to Jermaine Burton late in this game. It was a beautiful throw, but Texas and Quinn Ewers, I mean, this is what we saw last year with Quinn Ewers before he got hurt in this game. We saw a full healthy, Quinn Ewers in this game. It's just Alabama's secondary just didn't have any answer. A.D. Mitchell, if you remember him, he was a Georgia wide receiver on last year's national championship team. He was making plays. So this Alabama secondary, we know the talent with Kool-Aid McKinstry led by them in the middle. You have Dallas Turner, but Texas, they're going to be one of the most explosive offenses in the country. We saw also Texas defense really rise to the occasion. That defensive line got after Jalen Milroe. So this was definitely a huge win for Texas. We'll see if they can run the table in the Big 12. I think that their schedule sets up well for them, but Texas can get this big win, and then next week they could fall to a team like Kansas. So we'll definitely have to keep our eyes if Texas is for real. But on Alabama's side, this feels like a very long time since Alabama has one loss in September. I don't know when the last year was, but this is definitely a new thing for Alabama to deal with. They fall to number 10 before even SEC play starts. So I'm not even going to ask the question if you're concerned about Alabama, but do you think that Jalen Milroe should be the guy going forward for them?
I think he's got to be for now because I just don't think there's a better option. But did guys not want to sit under Bryce Young for a couple of years and then get handed the keys to this offense? Because at what point did Nick Saban not recruit a quarterback for 3 years? I mean, I guess Milroe probably was a pretty highly rated guy coming out of high school to get an Alabama offer. But I think we've been pretty blessed with the level of quarterback play Alabama's had the last, 7 or 8 years between Hurts, losing his job to Tua and then to Mac Jones, to Bryce Young. So, I mean, that was about as good of a run for quarterbacks as you could. All of them are playing today on Sunday. So definitely a rebuilding year at that position for Alabama. The rest of the team, it's pretty solid. So I do think they'll be competitive. But Texas, this is a good glimpse for them into the SEC life. But like you mentioned, they can't let it slip now that they go back to, playing their Big 12 schedule the rest of the year. Can't have any slip ups against a team like Kansas State or Oklahoma State or one of those teams.
Yeah, like we talked about LSU, Alabama with one more loss, they're out of the college football playoffs. We haven't seen in the college football player era a 2-loss team. I don't think that we're going to see this year. So both of the teams already that we saw, the top 2 teams in the SEC West that we thought already have 1 loss. Who would have thought that? I don't think anyone. So this is definitely going to be a crazy year in the SEC. We're going to keep up to that. And speaking of the Tigers, let's get into how the purple and gold fared against an in-state rivalry here. This was the first meeting between the 2 teams. Last year we saw LSU face off against Southern. So this was another year where they faced off against an in-state HBCU. LSU, 72 points. That's the most points that I've ever seen this team score in a couple of decades. So LSU gets to win 72-10. And since you're at the stadium, why don't you take it away with how this game went?
Wow, we beat Georgia 72-10. All right. No, this was a good game for LSU. I thought Grambling did a good job coming out the gate. They went down and scored a touchdown to answer LSU's first drive. So a good fight for Grambling. And this one had a couple nice long runs as well, but ultimately LSU was very efficient offensively. Jaden Daniels was able to, make his reads and find guys like Brian Thomas deep downfield. And then I thought it was good to see LSU get Logan Diggs involved. I still haven't figured out, if he's available or not for the Florida State game, if that was an injury thing or an internal decision to not play him for whatever reason. But he definitely looks like he could be the lead back for LSU. Compliments Josh Williams nicely as well. And a thought I had at the game was, where's Amani Goodwin? I mean, has he played yet this year for LSU at running back? I thought by this point we would see him. Maybe you have the answer to that. But other than that, I thought LSU looked pretty good. Still some question marks on defense, but they're young, and I think they'll continue to improve.
Yeah, definitely. LSU need this one to just get back and feeling right before they hit the road to Mississippi State. So we will move on from this game and go on to the next game in the slate of week number 2, and that is Missouri facing off against Middle Tennessee State. And Middle Tennessee State went 0-2 in their SEC tour, but looked way better in their second try against an SEC foe. As Missouri squeaked away for 23-19. I mean, what is some of these teams doing? Just squeaking past some teams that shouldn't even be close. But Missouri continues to rely on their running game and Cody Schrader. But Brady Cook, he did have 2 touchdowns in this one, but this offense has to get better by SEC play. I mean, this defense also has some glare marks too. But Missouri, I think that you're on one of my lists to just need to start fast and wake up before SEC play starts, or it's going to be a rough year for Missouri and some of these SEC teams. They're getting off to a little bit of slow starts this season. I know you're undefeated, but only squeaking away a 4-point win after Alabama just put up 56 on this team is definitely not where you want to be. All right, let's go on to the next SEC East team that was in action. This is another game that doesn't really need to get talked about. It was Florida versus McNeese, and after a rough road trip to Utah, Florida, the Gators were able to bounce back in this one. Graham Mertz had a good game. Montrell Johnson continued to be effective on the rush game, and then Florida's defense was able. I think that Florida's defense, I know they gave a 24 to Utah, but they've really been consistent. You're seeing growth from that defense from last year to this year. So another solid win for the Gators. They'll host the Volunteers this coming week. Let's talk about a next game that took another quarter in overtime as Mississippi State and Arizona faced off to complete their home and home matchups. Mississippi State took the fair last year. Mississippi State returned the favor once again. Mississippi State going into the half was up 14-7. The offense coordinator, I'm seeing from a lot of Mississippi State fans, they're not really happy with him after this game because Will Rogers, like I mentioned, only had 13 completions and 17 pass attempts. That's not what they're used to. They're used to Will Rogers having 13 pass attempts in the first drive. So we'll see Mississippi State's offense. I mean, putting up 31 points is still very impressive against an Arizona team that has a lot of experience. But Mississippi State blew the lead in this one a couple of times, but their defense was able to hold strong in overtime as Mississippi State will now go 2-2-0 and face off against LSU in the next game. All right, we're just going to quickly run through the last couple of games, and then we'll get into our week 3 picks and slate here. In the next one, we have South Carolina. They were able to bounce back after a rough loss in week number 1 against North Carolina. They face off against an in-state foe in Furman. South Carolina's defense, I just don't know. They just been on my bad list in the past couple of years. South Carolina's defense, giving up 21 points. I know Furman, they're a solid FCS program, don't get me wrong. But if South Carolina wants to be one of those dark horse teams in SEC East, the first 2 weeks aren't really doing it for me. The offense was able to bounce back, but we will see if they can bounce back against the Georgia defense, who is definitely going to be a tick up from what they faced in the first couple of 2 weeks of the season. And the final game, Auburn fans, I feel for you because this game did not end until 1 o'clock or past 1 o'clock in the morning. And this was a defensive battle. That's what I expected. It was a tough road trip. California's defense is always very pesky. This was a back and forth game. Not many offensive possessions here. Auburn ended up getting this victory. This was huge for them. It's a tough road trip going all the way from the Plains to California, but Auburn gets the 14-10 win. I feel like this was the game that was going to defy their season. If they can win this one, I think that they could definitely get to at least 6 wins, get to the bowl eligibility, and get back to playing Auburn football under the Hugh Freeze era. So that completes our Week 2 recap. Let's see how we did in the Week 2 pick'em results. And Wade and I continue to agree here. We went 13-1. Our one loss, yes,
Alabama.
it was the Texas Longhorns. But Chet went the other couple of ways, 11-3. He picked Texas A&M over Miami. That was wrong. He picked Cal over Auburn, and then Alabama over Texas. So we will see how the panel does in week number 3 as we go on to our SEC Week 3 preview. And that is always presented by one of our favorite sponsors is Fanatics. And like I mentioned about SeatGeek, you got to wear your apparel of your favorite team to the game. You don't be rocking something else. But go over to Fanatics. I'll keep our Fanatics link on the bottom of the screen. If Christmas is starting to come up, I got people asking me what I want for Christmas, and it's still a couple of months away. So who knows? You'll have those type of people. But if you want to get something for Fanatics,
you need a Tyreek Hill jersey. I mean, he has like 300 yards receiving.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into SEC Week 3 preview. Like I mentioned, we have some SEC conference games, and we start off with an 11 a.m. game. So if you're a fan of either LSU or Mississippi State, get your coffee ready because it's going to be an early one. So number 14 LSU at Mississippi State. Flashback to last year. I mean, Mississippi State got off to a hot start, and then LSU, like you remember, they got that punt return that was fumbled, and the LSU offense was able to come back and win that one 31-16. So this game is always going to come down to the wire, especially in Starkville. So you're going to roll with the Bulldogs or go with the Tigers to win this one?
Hey, you're putting us on the spot here. First game. All right. I like LSU in this one. Mississippi State, like we talked about, the change in philosophy at offense. I don't think they've got it down yet. And after the opener, I might have switched over to Mississippi State. But I think that it's going to take a couple more weeks for this offense to figure itself out. And I think LSU shook off some of the hiccups, and I think they'll be ready to go.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that this game is definitely always come down to the wire. I feel like this matchup, it's always tricky for both teams. This is LSU's, honestly not even to say first true road test, because if you watch the first game in Orlando, it was like 80, maybe 90% Florida State fans in that stadium. So LSU has been tested by the road atmosphere. Mississippi State with the Cowbells is always an interesting environment. But I've definitely been I think the matchup is going to be how Will Rogers attacks the secondary of LSU, because if you watch the past 2 games, even Grambling was able to have success against LSU's secondary. So I think that's going to be the main point there. And LSU's running game, if they can get Logan Diggs going, whoever's the starting running back, we'll see if John Emery gets back into this lineup. But I'm going to go with LSU here. I think it's going to be a defensive battle, like a 27-24 game is going to come down to a timely turnover. I think that LSU's defense ends up coming with a late stop to go and 1-0 in SEC play. But I think this is going to be a very good game. It always is. But I'm going to go with LSU to win this one, and Chet is also going to go with LSU. It's always a scary sight to see the 3 same logos on
especially
here.
Your team
matchup. But we'll see if the Tigers can pull through, or will it be Hail State pulling off the victory? All right, let's go on to the next slate. We have another very good matchup here. Number 15, Kansas State, heading to Missouri. We saw this one last year, and Kansas State was able to get the victory in Manhattan. Do you have the Wildcats going 2-0 versus Missouri in back-to-back years?
I sure do. I actually am pretty high on this Kansas State team. Their offense from a year ago was centered around Deuce Vaughn, but it's not all Deuce Vaughn, as he's now in the NFL playing for the Cowboys. So this team, they look pretty impressive the first couple weeks. And Missouri barely got past an FCS opponent the first week, and then against Middle Tennessee last week, they barely won. So I just don't think the offense is good enough to hang with the Wildcats.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Big 12 too here. I'm going to go with Kansas State. I know that they lost Deuce Vaughn and then one of their top cornerbacks in Julius Brents, but they got a lot of experience coming back. Their quarterback in Howard also has experience of winning big games. So, like you mentioned, I do agree with you that just Missouri just hasn't really impressed me in the first couple of weeks. I think that Kansas State with their head coach. I just think that they're going to be one of the really good teams in the Big 12, along with Oklahoma and Texas. I'm going to go with K State. Chet is also going to go against the SEC. So sweep again. We're going to go all with K State in this matchup. All right, let's go on to the CBS 2:30 games. All right, this is our last slate of 2:30 games in the CBS, and the SEC will strictly be on it on ABC and ESPN networks going forward. So South Carolina at number one Georgia, and there's been some times that South Carolina has pulled off the upset. A couple of years ago in 2019, they were able to do it, but ever since, it just been all Georgia. So you're going to go with the upset, go with the Gamecocks, or are you going to continue to pick Georgia in dominating this series?
Hey, my heart wants to, and South Carolina did pull this off a couple of years ago between the hedges against Georgia. I just don't see it happening this year. I do think Spencer Rattler will give it a good fight. If this game were to turn into a shootout, who knows? South Carolina might have the more talented passer, but I just can't see it happening with the Georgia defense. Ultimately, I think that Georgia will get up. It'll be gradual. I think South Carolina could strike first, but I do think Georgia will build up a lead and hold it. Give me Georgia in this one. Let's say 28-17.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wouldn't be surprised if South Carolina keeps this game close, especially in the first half, the way that Georgia's has been. But I think that Georgia hasn't really shown their cards yet. I think they just unleashed this offense in this game. I'm going to go with Georgia. I'll go 31-13. I think that South Carolina's offense has to be able to, Spencer Rattler, that offensive line has me worried against the Georgia defensive line that can actually attack the quarterback. So I'm going to go with Georgia here. And Chet, upset specialist, is back.
All
He's going to
right,
go South Carolina Gamecocks. The first major upset that we see. So it's definitely nice to see him throw a little curveball at us. So, yeah, if Georgia goes down, then I don't know who the heck is going to win the SEC this year. It's all going to be a toss-up. But 2 Georgia and 1 South Carolina in this big matchup in the SEC East. So let's go on to the next one, and it is number 10, Alabama. Yes, they are traveling to South Florida. That is not a typo. I don't know if, like you mentioned, if Alabama got cheap or they just decided they just wanted to go on
free trip to the beach, man.
Florida and just say, why not? So are you going to go with Alabama and bouncing back? Or going to go, this would be the most insane upset of South Florida. South Florida was 1-11 last year. So I'm sure you're going to go the tie.
Yeah, they told Alabama they have to play a road game in Florida like LSU and A&M did, so they took the easiest route. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah, I don't think there'll be much of a hiccup here. Alabama might not be as dominant as in years past, but they're certainly dominant enough to beat South Florida.
And for all the South Carolina fans, our upset specialist himself, let's go Cox. We'll see if he gets it done. If that happens,
he just wants time at the beach house. He's trying to kiss up to my grandparents.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to go with Alabama. I don't think it's going to be close. It's going to be a pissed off Alabama team, and that's exactly what you don't want if you're South Florida, especially at your home stadium. I think that South Florida fans just don't really care about that program the way that it's been the past couple of years. So I think Alabama fans will definitely travel down there to Tampa. And Chet is once again going to go with Alabama to bounce back against the Bulls. So it was a pretty easy pick for us. So we'll see if the next game is as easy as this one. And it looks like it's going to be, because it's going to be ULM at Texas A&M. ULM, like I mentioned, is 2-0, off to a great start this year. And Texas A&M needs a bounce back win after coming off of, not really an embarrassing loss, but a disappointing loss against Miami. So do you think the Aggies bounce back?
Yeah, I think they do. And like we said, that loss, it could go one of two ways. It could be a sign of what's to come for Texas A&M, or, hey, maybe Miami's a pretty good football team and it's a tough road loss. There's still a lot to play for, and this is a good opportunity to right the ship.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Texas A&M. I would think that this is going to be pretty quickly here. I picked Texas A&M's defense. You picked Connor Weigman. So I think that we're just basing on here that Texas A&M is going to get off to a hot start here against ULM, and this is all Aggies against the Warhawks. So let's go on now to another one. It features another SEC matchup, and this is our SEC Talk Game of the Week. I know we could have went with other ones, but I feel like whoever wins this game is probably going to be, especially if Tennessee is going to be the biggest threat to Georgia and the SEC East. So number 11, Tennessee at Florida. This game is always very good. It's a rivalry game. Both of these teams absolutely hate each other's guts. So you're going to go with the Vols or go with the Gators?
Tennessee, gave me a little reason of concern to question how good this team is last week, but I think it was more of a fluke, some bad weather. I think Tennessee is going to be pretty dominant in this one. I just think that Florida just still isn't there offensively. I know they put up 49 points against McNeese, but that's what they're expected to do. I think that Tennessee is just a more complete team.
Yeah, I think that, this is definitely a tricky area. The swamp, especially at night, it's going to be a tough place to play. I think that Florida's going to keep it closer than the experts think. I think that Florida's defense has impressed me. If they can keep Joe Milton under pressure, I think that it can work that. But like you mentioned, I think that the offense is here. I trust Tennessee's more. I think that the Florida running game will get going, but I think that Tennessee wins this game. But once again, I think it's going to be closer than most people will think. And Chet is also going to go with good old Rocky Top against Florida, and this one pulling off the road to win. And this would definitely be a huge win to boost Tennessee chances potentially winning the SEC. So they have Georgia. They're going to be hosting Georgia, and that's probably going to be one of the bigger games in the conference this season. All right, let's go to another FCS versus SEC game. That is going to feature the Samford Bulldogs. Samford is always a tough test, and they go on the road to Auburn. So do you have Auburn continuing their winning ways against Samford?
Yeah, I think Auburn's going to be just fine here. They had a nice win this past weekend. They look good on defense. So, hey, Auburn did more than every other SEC West team. They won their out-of-conference road game. So,
yeah, they did. It was definitely a tough one. I'm going to go with Auburn. I think that they just take care of business here against Samford, and Chet is going to go with the Tigers in this one against Samford, as we have another clean sweep here on the board. And let's go on to another one. It's going to be an interesting road trip. Another SEC team travels out west. Probably a better trip to go to, Berkeley in California than going to Las Vegas. So the Doors go on the road to UNLV. We saw this matchup a couple of years ago, and I believe UNLV ended up winning that game, if I'm correct. So do you have UNLV, the running Rebels, getting this victory?
hey, you do bring up a good point. I think that Auburn and UNLV should have played, and Cal and Vanderbilt should have played. I think that would have been more appropriate. Yeah, I got the running Rebels pulling off the win here in the Raiders Stadium. Vanderbilt just isn't very inspiring on offense. I don't think they're necessarily I don't know. I don't think they're the worst we've seen them, but I just don't think they've made a great stride from the little bit of momentum we saw from them last year. So I have UNLV pulling off the win, and it's been a very disappointing out of conference slate for the SEC. So I think this just adds to the fire.
And Czech continues to take shots at Vanderbilt's construction zone as they'll get to play in a fully constructed stadium. Yes, UNLV it definitely has a very interesting stadium. It's a very unique design, but this is like the first time that I think that I've ever seen the UNLV logo on the show. So this is the first. Write this down, history. Somebody on this show picked UNLV, but I'm gonna go not so fast on you. I'm gonna go with Vanderbilt.
Our first disagreement of the year.
Yes, our first disagreement. Also write this one down too, but I'm gonna go with Vanderbilt. I just, I know that they've been some struggles in this one, but I do have high hopes still that Vanderbilt can get to a bowl game this season. And if they drop this one, you can kiss your bowl dreams goodbye, because I don't see really many wins for them in the SEC. So I think if you got to get a win, you got to get a win here. It is definitely a tough road trip. They did it last year whenever they go on to the Hawaii Isles to face off against Hawaii. But I think Vanderbilt should have no problem against UNLV. And you're going to be the lone running Rebels, as Chet is also going to go with Vanderbilt. So this is your opportunity to pick up a game and get the victory in the pick'em. So let's see if that ends up working in your favor. We have 3 more games to get to. The next one features ACC versus SEC matchup. And once again, the ACC continues to be dominant against the SEC this season. We'll see if Georgia Tech can continue that, or will the streak stop against Ole Miss? So what do you have? You have the streak stopping, or do you have Georgia Tech continuing ACC's run here?
Yeah, there's no tricks up my sleeve here. The SEC gets one on the board. Pretty high on Ole Miss thus far. I think that the Tulane game was a harder test, and Ole Miss went into Atlanta last year and dismantled the Yellow Jackets, so I don't think they'll have any issue.
And this game has some SEC ties. Do you know who Georgia Tech's quarterback is?
Mr. Haynes King.
It is. Haynes King returns, and he takes the L. Ole Miss gets the victory. I don't think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be like 38-17. I just don't think that Georgia Tech's defense is going to have any answers to stop Jackson Dart in this explosive offense. So give me the Rebels. I think it's going to be one of the easiest picks of the weekend. And Chet is also going to go with Ole Miss in this one. So let's go on to the next one. Another interesting matchup. There's so many interesting matchups in week 3. It's bizarre, but we have BYU and Arkansas. Arkansas hit the road to Provo, but now BYU has to hit the road to Fayetteville. So Arkansas was able to win a sneaky game last year. Wasn't even close. Actually, KJ Jefferson lit up this offense. So do you have Arkansas, Woo Pig, going to 3-0?
Yeah, I think they will. One thing of note about Arkansas is Raheem Sanders has yet to play, or he didn't play last weekend, so that could have been why they were a little sluggish.
They're saving him up.
Yeah, so I think if he plays this week, Arkansas will look better, but if he doesn't, I think they'll be good enough. I think AJ Green is their running back, and he's been pretty good in relief of Sanders, and they just need to, of course, get him healthy for that LSU game.
Yeah, I think that Arkansas's defense will be the key in this one. They've really been solid the first 2 weeks. I think that Arkansas's offense, they finally found their rhythm here. I think that I'm going to take the Hogs. This is just a tough road trip for a West Coast team to come down to SEC country. It's just a different environment that BYU hasn't really seen this year. So I think that Arkansas gets the win, especially at home. I picked KJ Jefferson. I think that he's going to have a real solid game in this one. And Chet is also going to go with the Hogs, so clean sweep for the Razorbacks against BYU. So our final game is, usually our final game is a big one, but it's not. It's Akron at Kentucky. So do we have Kentucky moving on? We should have 3 Kentucky logos pop off on our screen. Just
UK.
Yep, UK, and UK. All right, let's move on to the next one. That is our week 3 slate. Like I mentioned, we'll get into recapping week number 3, but we have some hot topics to get to. Well, we don't even have to get into the first one because I already asked you that. The next one is honestly what our title is. So the SEC West is up for grabs. If you don't think so, yes, it is. The SEC West is up for grabs. You have like 3 teams already with 1 loss. So I know that you had LSU taking the division in the preseason. Does that stand right now on this day?
I got to say, at this day, I would give it to Ole Miss. I just think they look like the more complete team. I would say in the second tier, I would group LSU, Alabama, Texas A&M, and Arkansas. I know that's a big tier, but obviously they'll play each other and separate. And then you have teams that haven't done anything wrong, like Mississippi State and Auburn, I think, sitting right behind them. And then who am I forgetting? I think that's it. So,
yep. I think that Ole Miss, they were able to get off to a hot start last year. They went 7-0, and then that's when really it started to crumble. So we'll see. Ole Miss, they're off to a hot start. We'll see if they can continue that the weeks go on. Let us know in the comments who you have win the SEC West right now, because it's definitely anyone's game. It really hasn't felt like that. Whenever we're talking about the SEC West, we're usually penciling in Alabama. Now, Alabama, can they win still the SEC? Yes. But you know what? We still want to create some controversy on the show. The next one is who was your SEC player of the week? Which player in the SEC impressed you the most?
I like my SEC fantasy player, Brian Thomas. I mean, I think that he's emerging as a really good receiver within the conference, but I don't know. I would say it was the player of the week. Who do you have?
I think I'm going to go with Quinshon Judkins. I think that we really saw him his freshman season was outstanding. In week number one, I think that he had a good game, but he really was a dual threat. We saw him active in the passing game. We also saw him in the rushing game. I know it wasn't like 100 yards that we're used to, but he was able to get a touchdown against a really solid Tulane defense. So I'm going to give it to Judkins. He's my SEC Player of the Week.
All right.
All right, so let's go on to the next one. I know it's a duplicate one, but we honestly had no news or hot topics, so I'm just gonna ask you
And
another
sometimes
one.
no news is good news.
Yeah, which SEC team impressed you the most during week 2? There should be some little more answers since more SEC teams actually played somebody with a pulse.
Hey, my SEC team that impressed me the most was a 2024 SEC team, the Texas Longhorns.
Okay, yeah, you can use that. I'll let you use it.
But out of the current teams, I would have to say Ole Miss again. I know I'm really riding Ole Miss here, and we gave Judkins some love too, but I thought that they handled business against Tulane, winning that game by 17. They were down early, but they never panicked. I think they had the most impressive win of the weekend. And then from the East, I'll give you a second team.
Okay.
I mean, I know that we talked about Vanderbilt and Kentucky struggling, so which team's going to assert themselves behind Georgia? I don't know. I think the answer, honestly, is still Tennessee. They definitely didn't impress me the most this week. I think it was probably South Carolina riding the ship offensively, so that at least we can see if they have a chance against Georgia. I think that they'll have the first shot at them, and who knows? Maybe they'll catch Georgia slipping since Georgia hasn't played anybody good. But Ole Miss is the answer for me overall.
Ole Miss is the answer for me too. So maybe we'll just call this the Ole Miss show because we're definitely high on them so far. So I think that going on the road against Tulane, I know it was no quarterback, but still, it was a 17-point victory. Their defense, if their defense can really play like that, I think that their offense is going to travel every single week. If Jackson Dart gets hurt, well, they can just call up here, Spencer Sanders, you come on the field. He has experience too. But I think that having a guy like Judkins, they also have some talented receivers. I feel like every year we're talking about these Ole Miss receivers too. On the East, well, I don't really have been impressed with any team so far, so we'll see if an SEC East team can impress me this week. I think it will, and we'll see if Georgia will be that team. So Chet brings up IDK. That final score from Ole Miss should have been closer, more like a 3-point win in the end. I definitely agree with you. The score doesn't really tell the whole story. That was definitely a back and forth game. Tulane with the circumstances, their backup quarterback, they had a couple of throws. That was very impressive. So I don't think that Tulane's a team. I honestly don't think that they deserve to be out of the top 25 with that loss because, we've seen in the past, the college football playoff committee has been, oh, your star quarterback is out, then that doesn't really negate you. So we'll see if Tulane gets the same treatment. I hope they do. I think that Tulane look at the rest. What?
Group of 5. I'll let you finish your point, but I have a group of 5 update after this. It's a hot topic.
Okay. But I think that Tulane, if you look at the rest of their schedule, they'll be fine. If Pratt is healthy, I think this is going to be an 11-1 team. And they'll be right back in the New Year's 6 discussion. All right. Give me your group of 5 hot take.
All right. On our other show on Sports Scramble, we were asked to identify a group of 5 team that could make the New Year's 6 Bowl. I told everybody it would be James Madison, and they had one Power 5 opponent on their schedule this year. It was a pretty weak one in the Virginia Cavaliers. James Madison won that game by 1 point, so Tulane could be getting some heat from James Madison for that New Year's 6 Bowl spot.
Yeah, they definitely will. And the one last question that we have is Jayden Daniels still the star quarterback for LSU? I know that a lot of LSU fans want it to be the Nuts Bus time, but you still think that the Tigers are going to rock with Daniels the rest of the way?
Yeah, I would expect LSU to rock with Daniels. I thought Nussmeier looked pretty good in relief, but unless the season just takes a turn for the worst, I think that this team's made up its mind with Daniels. But we've seen crazier things happen, and who knows? Maybe there's a play or two that Brian Kelly likes Nussmeier more for, maybe like a deep shot. So he's definitely going to put on his pads every weekend, and he'll get his shot when the time comes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Jaden Daniels will be the guy. And then Garrett Nussmeier will have to wait in 2024. I think that's whenever the Nuss Bus will get the keys to the car. So that's going to be it for SEC Talk week number 3. We have one more popping in here. Honestly, don't think BK will make any changes based on what we have seen so far. I do think that the offense will be better next year with Nuss. We'll see. You're going to be losing Malik Neighbors. You're going to be losing Josh Williams and John Emery out of the backfield. So we'll see. The recruit trail is always going to be there for LSU. So I think that the pass catchers will definitely be there. You'll have Brian Thomas, your guy. I think that he's going to be stepping up. Kyron Lacey, we'll see what he does. So
Chris Hilton.
we don't want to talk about next year. So
We're
not talking about next year. We're going to enjoy this. We're already talking about week 3. So these are just rolling on. So that's going to be it for SEC Talk this week. Next week, we'll get into recapping week number 3. Again, so week number 4, that's whenever SEC slate. We'll definitely get right into it. We have 3 or 4 games this week in the conference. So we'll see who can get a step up on these SEC teams. So that's going to be it for us. Hope everybody enjoys the rest of their week, and we will see you back here on SEC Talk next time.